The night it happened, I still remember how the air outside carried that strange heaviness. The kind you can't explain, but you just feel deep in your bones. I was sitting on the porch swing, trying to calm my nerves after another long day of HOA harassment, when the sound of a car pulling up made my stomach twist. It wasn't unusual for people to slow down near my house. The HOA always had their officers checking in on me, making sure I was following their ridiculous rules. But this time felt different. The headlights lingered too long, the engine idled too low, and when the doors opened, 3 men stepped out in dark jackets with fake badges clipped to their belts. My heart dropped instantly. Something inside me screamed, this wasn't about fines or warnings. This was about control. For months, the HOA had been tightening their grip on the neighborhood, picking at every little thing about my home. The flowers in my front yard weren't approved colors. The fence wasn't uniform with community standards. Even my American flag was too large for the guidelines. They fined me so much I had stopped opening their letters. But behind the rules, there was something darker, a hunger for power, for crushing people who dared to live freely. I thought I was used to their games, but that night I realized they weren't just playing anymore. They wanted me gone, and they were willing to cross every line to do it. The men moved fast, and my body locked up in terror. They came onto my porch like they owned it, flashing their fake IDs and barking orders about noncompliance. My throat dried up, and I tried to reason with them, but one of them grabbed my arm hard enough to leave a bruise. I yelled, but the neighborhood was too quiet. Everyone else had learned to stay silent when the HOA came knocking. Fear clamped down on me like cold iron. For a split second, I thought they might actually succeed in dragging me off into that van. Then, just as my knees started to give out, a voice cut through the night. Low, dangerous, steady. It was my brother's voice. Take your hands off my sister. I had nearly forgotten he was visiting, sleeping inside after his long drive. My brother Marcus had served years as a Marine, and though he tried to leave the battlefield behind when he came home, that protective fire never left him. He stood there at the doorway, eyes sharp, shoulders squared, and in that moment, I saw the soldier again. The men hesitated, but only for a second. They thought their numbers would intimidate him. They didn't know who they were dealing with. Marcus stepped down from the porch like a storm breaking, controlled, but with an intensity that made even me shiver. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He told them he knew their badges were fake, that he could smell their fear from 10 feet away, and that if they didn't release me, they'd regret ever setting foot on our land. For the first time, I saw the men falter. They loosened their grip, glanced at each other, but pride made them dig their heels in. One tried to shove Marcus's back. That was their biggest mistake. What happened next was a blur of motion, a terrifying but beautiful display of everything the Marines had trained into my brother. He didn't fight wildly. He fought with precision. In seconds, he had the first man disarmed and gasping for breath on the ground. The second man lunged, but Marcus twisted him into a hold so tight his knees buckled. The third tried to run back to the van, but Marcus's voice stopped him cold. Don't even think about it. I stood frozen, my heart pounding in my ears, tears blurring my vision. It wasn't just the violence of the moment that shook me. It was the realization of how close I had come to losing everything. And yet, as I watched those men, now trembling in the dirt, I felt something I hadn't in months: safety. 4. The first time since the HOA had declared war on me. I wasn't alone. Marcus forced the truth out of them, their names, who sent them, and what they had planned. They weren't real officers. They were hired thugs, paid off by a few HOA board members who wanted me out. The words made my blood boil. I had suspected for so long that the HOA wasn't just about rules. Now I knew for certain. They wanted control. They wanted power. And they thought they could scare me into surrendering my home. But they hadn't counted on Marcus. When he was done with them, they weren't tough anymore. They were begging him to let them go, swearing they'd never come near me again, swearing they'd walk away from the job. Their voices cracked, their bodies shook, and in that moment, I saw the full weight of fear turned back on them. It was justice, raw and unfiltered. But justice wasn't done yet. Marcus made it clear. They were going to leave, and they were going to carry a message back to the HOA board. If they ever tried something like this again, they wouldn't just face fines or complaints, they'd face him. And Marcus wasn't bluffing. When the van finally screeched away, silence returned to the night. I collapsed against Marcus, sobbing so hard I could barely breathe. He held me, his hand steady on my back, whispering that he'd never let them hurt me. But even as I tried to believe him, I knew this wasn't over. The HOA had crossed a line tonight, and people like that didn't stop until they were forced to. For the first time in a long time, I felt a spark of fight ignite in me. They had tried to take me away from my home, from my life. They had tried to break me. But with Marcus by my side, I wasn't going to be the one begging anymore. No, the HOA's reign of terror was about to end, and they didn't even know it yet. The morning after the attack, I woke up with the kind of heaviness that sits on your chest, making it hard to breathe. My arm was sore where one of those men had grabbed me, purple bruises already forming. I stared at them in the bathroom mirror, my reflection pale and shaken, and for a moment the thought of how close I came to being dragged into that van made my knees buckle. I clutched the sink, fighting off the rising tide of panic. Marcus was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, calm as stone. He'd been like that his whole life, steady, unshaken, no matter how bad things got. But when he looked up at me, his eyes softened. He didn't say, "I told you so," or "You'll be fine." He simply said, "We're not letting this slide." I sat down across from him, trembling. "What can we even do, Marcus? They're the HOA. Everyone's scared of them. Even the neighbors won't speak up." He leaned in, his voice low, but burning with quiet fury. "They're not the law. They're just bullies with money and influence. And last night, they crossed a line even they can't erase. They hired criminals to scare you into giving up your home. That makes them dangerous, and it makes them sloppy. Which means, little sister, we've got them exactly where we want them." I wanted to believe him, but fear tangled with doubt inside me. The HOA had destroyed people in our neighborhood before. Families who couldn't pay fines lost their homes. Good people humiliated at meetings, lives dismantled one rule at a time. They always seemed untouchable, shielded by lawyers and hidden behind endless regulations. They weren't supposed to be challenged. But when I looked at Marcus, I saw no fear in him, only determination. And that lit a fire in me too. Later that day, we went out to the porch, still scarred with footprints from the struggle the night before. The air smelled of damp earth after the night's storm. Marcus pulled out his phone and began scrolling through pictures. Turns out he'd recorded part of the confrontation without anyone noticing. Every word those fake officers had said, every plea when Marcus forced the truth out of them, was there on video. Proof. For the first time in months, the HOA's lies weren't just whispers and paper trails. We had evidence. Do you know what this means? Marcus asked, showing me the screen. They can't bury this. They can't find this away. We've got leverage. I nodded, my heart racing. But even as hope flickered inside me, a knock at the door made both of us tense instantly. Marcus motioned for me to stay back as he opened it. It was our neighbor, Mrs. Callahan, a widow who'd lived 2 houses down for decades. She looked over her shoulder before stepping inside, clutching a folded piece of paper. Her hands shook. As she spoke, "I heard what happened last night." Everyone did. They may not admit it, but people saw the van. They heard shouting. I swallowed, embarrassed, but she pressed the paper into my hands. "They came after my late husband, too," she whispered. "Years ago, he fought back over their fines, and suddenly he was being followed, harassed, threatened. I couldn't prove it, but I always knew they weren't just enforcing rules, they were trying to scare us into selling. They wanted our land cheap, and now they're doing it to you." The paper she gave me was a copy of an old letter. Demand notice from the HOA. The ink faded, but still sharp with cruelty. Threats of legal action, eviction, ruin. My hands trembled as I read it. It was the same tactics they used on me, the same language. They had a pattern, a history. Marcus's jaw tightened. "This is bigger than I thought," he muttered. They've been pulling this for years. How many families have they pushed out of here? How much property have they stolen under the guise of regulations?" Mrs. Callahan's eyes filled with tears. "Most of us are too scared to speak. But if you fight, maybe some of us will stand with you." Her words struck something inside me. Fear had been our silence. That's how the HOA thrived. They didn't just steal homes. They stole voices. They made people feel small and helpless, like fighting back was impossible. But standing there, with Marcus beside me and Mrs. Callahan's trembling faith in my hands, I realized we had something powerful now. Courage. That night, Marcus and I planned. We spread papers and files across the dining table, gathering every fine notice, every threatening letter, every shred of proof. Marcus even walked me through how to set up cameras outside, hidden but effective, so if they tried anything again, we'd catch it. He wasn't just protecting me anymore. He was building a case, piece by piece. But the HOA wasn't going to sit quietly. A letter arrived the very next morning, thick and stamped with their seal. Inside was a final warning, demanding I attend a board meeting the following week or face serious consequences. They claimed I was in violation of community standards, though they listed no specific infractions. It was a trap, pure and simple. I read it out loud, my voice shaking. Marcus smirked. "Good. Let's give them a show." I blinked at him. "You want me to go?" He nodded. "Absolutely. They think they've cornered you, expect you to beg or break down. But instead, we'll walk in with proof, with witnesses, with their own lies on tape. We'll turn the tables." Fear and excitement wrestled inside me. The idea of walking into that room full of smug faces made my stomach churn, but Marcus's steady confidence was unshakable. For years, they had been the hunters. Now, maybe, just maybe, they were about to become the hunted. As the week crept toward that meeting, word began to spread. Neighbors started dropping by quietly, slipping old letters and stories into my hands. Every single one was the same. Intimidation, threats, ruin. Families forced to sell for pennies, board members flipping the properties for profit. Each story fueled my anger, each tear-stained page building a fire in my chest by the time the night of the meeting came. I wasn't just going for me. I was going for all of us. And I swore, standing in front of that mirror with my bruises fading but still raw, that they were about to see me differently. I wasn't their victim anymore. I was done being silent. The night of the HOA meeting felt like stepping into the lion's den. My stomach was tight, my palms damp, and every step toward the community hall felt heavier than the last. The building itself wasn't large, just a repurposed clubhouse with stale carpeting and a smell of coffee that had lingered for years. But that night, it looked like the stage of a trial. The board sat at their long table up front, smug. As ever, papers stacked neatly in front of them. Their leader, Richard Thornton, sat in the middle, polished glasses perched on his nose, the picture of fake authority. He was the kind of man who thrived on control, who smiled while destroying lives. The room was packed with neighbors, most of them quiet, their eyes darting nervously toward the board. The HOA always made these meetings feel like public shaming rituals. I had been dragged there before, humiliated over the color of my fence or the size of my garden, while everyone else sat silent. But tonight was different. Tonight, Marcus sat beside me. His calm presence was like a shield, his shoulders squared, and his gaze locked on Thornton with that cold, unblinking look only a Marine could carry. As soon as I walked in, whispers rippled through the room. People had heard about the van. They had seen me with bruises, seen Marcus patrolling my yard like a sentry. Fear had shifted just a little, and for the first time, the board looked unsettled too. Thornton cleared his throat, pretending to be in control. "We'll begin with the matter of Miss Thompson's repeated violations." His voice carried that oily arrogance that made my skin crawl. I opened my mouth to respond, but Marcus laid a hand on my arm. "Not yet," he whispered. Thornton went on, rattling off vague accusations. "Your home fails to meet community appearance standards. Your landscaping is non-compliant. And we've received reports of disruptive behavior, including last week's incident." His lips curled in a mock sympathetic smile. "We understand emotions ran high, but this community values order, not chaos." My chest burned with rage. They were twisting what happened, framing me as the problem, painting their hired thugs as reports. Before I could explode, Marcus stood. He didn't raise his voice, but the quiet authority in it silenced the room. "You're right about one thing," Marcus said, his voice cutting through the air. "There was an incident, and I have proof of exactly who caused it." Gasps echoed as Marcus pulled out his phone and connected it to the small projector on the wall. Within seconds, the screen lit up with the grainy footage he had recorded. The room froze as the video played. The three men stepping out of the van, their fake badges, their hands on me, my cries, and then their desperate begging when Marcus forced the truth out of them. Every word, every trembling confession, poured out into the silent room. When the video ended, the air was heavy enough to choke on. No one moved. No one spoke. Thornton's face had drained of color, his smugness shattered. He shifted in his seat, stammering, This is taken out of context." "Those were security contractors." Marcus snapped, his voice suddenly sharp. "Then why did they admit, on tape, they were sent to intimidate my sister on your orders? Why did they beg for mercy when caught? Why did they run like criminals if they were legitimate?" A murmur of agreement rose. From the crowd, neighbors whispering to one another, eyes widening as the truth sank in. Thornton adjusted his glasses, his hands shaking just enough to betray him. We had concerns about compliance. Sometimes measures must be taken to ensure order." "Order?" My voice cracked as I finally stood, the fire in me boiling over. "You call sending men to kidnap me order? You've been terrorizing this community for years, hiding behind rules and fines, destroying families, stealing homes. And for what? To line your pockets. To control us like we're pawns in your little kingdom." My voice shook, but I didn't. "Back down? Well, not anymore. You don't get to scare us into silence." Something broke in the room then. It was subtle, but I felt it. The neighbors, once too afraid to speak, were beginning to stir. Mrs. Callahan was the first. She stood slowly, her frail hands trembling, but her voice clear. "They did the same to my husband," she said, her words cracking with pain. "They hounded him until the day he died. They wanted our land. They wanted everything." Other neighbor, Mr. Delgado, stood next. "They forced me to sell my father's house. threatened to sue us into bankruptcy if we didn't comply. His voice trembled with anger. One by one, voices rose. Stories spilled out. Harassment, intimidation, ruined lives. The weight of years of silence broke apart, and suddenly, the board wasn't untouchable anymore. They were surrounded, cornered by the truth that had finally found its voice. Thornton slammed his gavel against the table, desperate to regain control. Enough. This is slander. These are baseless accusations from people who don't understand how governance works. But no one listened. The tide had turned. Marcus leaned close to me, his whisper steady. This is what they're afraid of. The truth spreading. Keep going. I swallowed hard, my hands shaking, but my voice steady. We have proof. We have witnesses. And if you think you can bury this, think again. We're taking this beyond your little boardroom. The police, the courts, the media, if we have to. You wanted to scare me into silence? Instead, you woke us. All up, the roar of agreement that followed shook the walls. For the first time, the board wasn't the authority in that room. They were the ones under fire. Thornton's face twisted with rage and fear, his polished mask finally cracking. He slammed his papers shut, muttering threats about legal action, but I could see it in his eyes. He was rattled. He knew the game had changed as the meeting dissolved into chaos. Neighbors surrounded me, their eyes no longer downcast, but lit with something fierce. Hope, courage. Marcus stood tall beside me, his arm brushing mine in silent reassurance. We had cracked the foundation of the HOA's power, and once the cracks started, there was no stopping the collapse. But as I looked at Thornton's trembling hands and the cold hatred in his eyes, I realized something chilling. He wasn't going to let this go. People like him never did. And if last night had taught me anything, it was that the HOA wouldn't hesitate to cross every line to keep control. The fight had just begun. That night, after the meeting, I sat on the porch again, the same place where everything had nearly gone wrong just days earlier. The night air was cool, but my chest felt hot, burning with both fear and defiance. The meeting had shaken the HOA's grip, yes, but it had also painted a target on my back. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach, that sense of being watched. I kept replaying Thornton's eyes in my mind, the way they had narrowed when he realized he'd lost control, the venom hiding behind his fake smile. He wasn't done. Not by a long shot. Marcus came out and dropped into the chair beside me, silent at first. He didn't have to say anything. Just his presence made the darkness feel less heavy. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and certain. They're going to hit back. Men like Thornton don't walk away quietly. But now they're desperate, and desperate people make mistakes. That's when we'll finish this. I turned to him, my voice cracking. But what if they try something worse? Last time they tried to kidnap me? What's next, Marcus? Burning the house down, hurting someone else. He reached over, gripping my hand. His calloused fingers were warm, grounding. That's why I'm here. You're not alone anymore. They come after you again. They're not just dealing with you. They're dealing with me. And I promise you, sis, I don't lose. I wanted to believe him, and a part of me did. But the truth was, I was still scared. Even with the neighbors starting to rise up, even with the video proof, the HOA still held power. They had money, lawyers, connections. And Thornton wasn't just a bully. He was cunning. He had made a career out of breaking people without leaving fingerprints. The next morning proved Marcus right. A letter arrived in the mail. This one far more threatening than the last. Thick envelope, stamped not just with the HOA seal, but with a law firm's letterhead. Inside was a cease and desist order. They accused me of defamation, threatened a lawsuit for spreading false. claims and demanded I remove the video Marcus had shown at the meeting from circulation. My hands shook as I read it. Marcus took the papers from me, scanned them, and actually smirked. Scare tactics. They're bluffing. If they had any real case, they wouldn't have to hire thugs in the first place. But they're betting you'll panic. I almost did. My heart pounded, my mind spiraled. But then Marcus's calm anchored me. "So, what do we do?" I whispered. He leaned back, folding the letter neatly and setting it aside. "We gather more. More proof, more stories, more people. We make it impossible for them to silence us. And when we've got enough, we don't just fight back, we crush them." The days that followed were like living on a battlefield. Though the weapons weren't bullets, but words, stares, and intimidation. HOA patrols cruised by my house more often, their cars idling at the curb just a little too long. Flyers appeared in mailboxes, accusing me of being a troublemaker who was tearing the community apart. One night, someone spray-painted "Sell out" on my fence in dripping red letters. I broke down crying when I saw it. I felt so small, so powerless. I wanted to curl up and hide. But Marcus stood there, jaw tight, spray can already in hand. He painted over it in silence, then turned to me. "They want you broken. Don't give them that satisfaction. If you hold your ground, I'll hold the line." And he did. Every night, he sat outside, watchful, unflinching, a quiet sentinel. And word spread. Neighbors began to notice. Slowly, they started walking over, one by one, to bring us their stories. Old letters, threatening voicemails, photos of violations that made no sense. Mrs. Callahan brought tea and told me about the night strange men had followed her husband home before his sudden heart attack. Mr. Delgado brought a folder thick with fines that had tripled overnight. A young mother whispered that she'd been threatened with eviction if her disabled son's wheelchair ramp wasn't torn down. Each story was worse than the last, and each one lit more fire in me. One evening, as we spread the evidence across the table, Marcus looked at me with something fierce in his eyes. "You see what you've started? They thought they could scare you into silence. Instead, you've given these people hope. You've woken them up. But with that awakening came risk." Thornton knew he was losing control. And when people like him lost control, they struck harder. It was nearly midnight when it happened. I was drifting to sleep when Marcus's sharp whisper jolted me awake. "Stay down, don't move." My heart slammed against my ribs as I slid off the bed and crouched low. From the window, I could hear it footsteps outside, soft but deliberate. Then the faint creak of the porch steps. My blood turned cold. Marcus moved like a shadow, gun drawn, every muscle taut. The training was second nature to him. I stayed hidden, trembling, straining to hear. Then a loud crash, the sound of the back door being forced open. My scream caught in my throat. The next moments unfolded in chaos. Marcus burst from the bedroom, his voice booming like thunder. "You picked the wrong house." Shouts followed. Hurried footsteps, and then a scuffle. My heart felt like it would burst. I couldn't see everything, but I could hear it. The thud of bodies, the desperate curses of men who had expected an easy target and instead found a Marine lying in. Wait. When it was over, Marcus dragged one of them into the light of the living room. His face was bloodied, eyes wide with terror. "Who sent you?" Marcus barked, pressing him down. The man stammered, shaking. "T.H. Thornton. He said to scare her. He said to make her leave for good." My stomach lurched, bile rising. In my throat, Thornton had escalated. He wasn't hiding behind fines or letters anymore. He had sent men into my home. Marcus's voice was ice. "You tell Thornton this was his last mistake. If he ever comes near her again, he'll wish he'd never been born." The intruders fled, stumbling into the night, broken and terrified. Marcus locked the doors, checked the windows, then came to me. I collapsed into his arms, sobbing so hard my chest hurt. He held me tight, his hand steady against the back of my head. "I told you, Sess," he whispered. "I don't lose." But I knew this war was far from over. Thornton had declared it. Openly now, and it was only going to get worse. The difference was, I wasn't afraid anymore. I was furious. And I wasn't alone. The morning after the break-in, I stood in the kitchen with trembling hands, trying to pour coffee. My body still ached from fear. My mind replaying the sounds of boots crashing against my floor. The sight of Marcus dragging that man into the light. Every creak in the house made me jump. Every shadow outside the window made my chest tighten. Sleep had been impossible. My home, the place that was supposed to be my safe space, had been violated. Marcus sat at the table, calm as ever, but I could see it in the set of his jaw. The stiffness in his shoulders. He wasn't calm, he was calculating. "This isn't random," he said finally, his voice quiet but firm. "Thornton's getting sloppy. He's desperate. That makes him dangerous, but it also means he's leaving evidence behind. Last night gave us something stronger than any letter or video." I sat down across from him, my eyes stinging with tears. "What do you mean?" He leaned forward, his hands clasped tight. "A break-in with witnesses, with confessions. That's criminal. We don't just have proof of harassment anymore. We've got proof of felony crimes, forced entry, attempted assault. This isn't just HOA nonsense now. This is law enforcement territory." A flicker of hope sparked inside me. "Fragile but real. You think the police will actually help?" Marcus gave me a half smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "They'll have no choice once we put it all together. And if they try to bury it, then we'll go higher. Media, federal authorities, whatever it takes." Thornton's time is running out. For the first time, I believed it. Later that afternoon, we gathered with a small group of neighbors in my living room. Mrs. Callahan sat on the couch, her hands folded tightly in her lap, while Mr. Delgado leaned against the wall, his face hard. Even the young mother with the wheelchair-bound son came, her eyes red but fierce. Each of them carried folders, letters, and scraps of evidence that together painted a horrifying picture of the HOA's corruption. "This is more than just bullying," Coos told them. "This is organized abuse, extortion, fraud. They've been running this like a criminal operation for years." Mrs. Callahan's voice shook as she spoke. "They took my husband's dignity before they took his health. I don't care what happens to me anymore. They need to pay." The room was heavy with grief, but also alive with something I hadn't felt in months: unity. For so long, each of us had been isolated, picked apart piece by piece. Now we were together, and together we were strong. We decided on a plan. Marcus would compile everything: the video, the letters, the testimonies. Even the recordings from the security cameras he had set up outside. We would present it to the authorities first, but if they brushed us off, we'd take it public. A press conference, a news story, whatever it took to drag the HOA's crimes into the light. But Thornton wasn't sitting still. That night, as I lay awake listening to the crickets, I saw headlights sweep across my wall. I peered through the curtains and saw a black SUV idling at the end of the street, not moving, just sitting there. Watching, my blood ran cold. I hurried to Marcus, who was already at the window, arms crossed. "They're watching," I whispered. "Good," he muttered. "Let them. They'll see we're not scared." But I was scared. Deep down, I knew Thornton wasn't going to go down quietly. The next day proved it. A letter appeared on every Doorstep in the neighborhood, stamped with the HOA seal. It was a public notice, claiming I was endangering community safety, spreading lies, and provoking criminal activity that threatened everyone. The words dripped with venom, twisting the truth until I looked like the villain. As I read it, my knees buckled. Marcus crumpled the paper in his fist. Classic propaganda. He's losing control, so he's trying to turn the neighbors against you. But something happened Thornton didn't expect. Instead of siding with him, more neighbors came to me. They'd had enough. They'd seen the break-in, heard the screams, watched Marcus drag those men out of my house. They knew who the real danger was. One by one, they showed up at my door, offering help, offering stories, offering their voices. Thornton's attempt to isolate me had backfired spectacularly. By the end of the week, we had a stack of evidence, inches thick, and nearly 24 neighbors willing to stand beside us. Thornton still had his board, his lawyers, his fake officers, but he was bleeding power. You could see it in the way his patrol cars stopped parking out front, the way his board members avoided eye contact at the grocery store. The mask was cracking. Then came the phone call. I was in the kitchen when the landline rang, a number I didn't recognize. Against my better judgment, I answered. Silence at first. Then a voice. Low, cold. I recognized it instantly. Thornton, you think you're clever, he hissed. You think your little show at the meeting means anything? Let me tell you something. Girl, I built this community. I own it. And you. You're just one broken piece I can replace. Back off, or next time, your Marine brother won't be enough to save you. My breath caught. My whole body trembled. Before I could respond, Marcus took the phone from my hand. Listen to me, Thornton, he said, his voice calm but lethal. You so much as breathe in her direction again, and I'll bury you with your own lies. You want to play tough? Come find me. But leave my sister the hell alone. He hung up. Without waiting for a reply, I collapsed into a chair, shaking, tears spilling down my cheeks. Marcus crouched in front of me, his hands firm on my shoulders. He's rattled, he's scared. That's why he's lashing out. We've got him right, where we want him. But deep down, I knew this was the most dangerous part. A cornered animal doesn't surrender. It fights with everything it has. And Thornton was cornered. The storm was coming, and it was going to break soon. The courtroom was filled with the silence, so sharp it could cut. Every eye was on the men sitting in the defendants' chairs, those fake HOA officers who had tried to destroy everything. Their suits looked cheap now, their faces pale, their arrogance gone. It was almost hard to believe these were the same men who had once knocked on my door, trying to kidnap me with their lies and threats. Almost my brother sat next to me, his arms crossed, his expression calm but deadly serious. I could see the way his jaw tightened each time one of them opened their mouth. He wasn't just here for me anymore, okay? He was here for every family they had hurt. The prosecutor rose and began laying out the evidence. Photos of the fake badges. Recorded audio of them threatening residents. Financial statements showing how much money they had stolen. Each piece landed like a hammer. The judge's face grew darker with every word, while the men squirmed in their seats, whispering frantically to their lawyers. My chest swelled with a mix of relief and fury. Relief that they were finally being exposed. Fury that it had taken so long for them to face justice. When the prosecutor called me to the stand, I could feel my legs tremble, but I stood tall. My brother gave me a small nod, just enough to remind me I wasn't alone. I told the court everything. The first time, they showed up demanding fees that didn't exist. The threats, the intimidation. The night they tried to drag me away from my own home. My voice shook at first, But then I remembered that hook in their eyes, that gleam of power they thought they had over me. And suddenly, the fear was gone. I spoke with a strength I didn't even know I had. One of the fake officers actually tried to interrupt, shouting that I was lying, but the judge slammed her gavel so hard the sound echoed through the room. "You will be silent," she barked. And for the first time, I saw pure fear in their eyes. They weren't in control anymore. After my testimony, my brother was called to the stand. The entire courtroom leaned forward as he walked up, his military posture unshakable. He spoke of honor, of duty, of how men like these prey on the weak because they've never faced anyone strong enough to stand up to them. "They didn't just come after my sister," he said, his voice steady and firm. "They came after every honest, hardworking person in this community. But they made one mistake. They forgot that families like mine don't break. We fight back." His words hit harder than any evidence could. Even the judge's eyes softened for a moment. The defense tried to twist the story, painting their clients as confused men running a misunderstood organization. But the pile of evidence was too heavy. The neighbors who took the stand one after another sealed their fate. An old woman described how they had threatened to tow her car unless she paid them cash. A young couple broke down crying, recalling how they were almost forced out of their home because they couldn't keep up with the fake fees. Every story made the walls close in tighter on the men at the table. Finally, the judge announced her decision. Guilty on all counts: fraud, extortion, attempted kidnapping, impersonating officers. The words seemed to freeze time. Then the sentencing came, and the courtroom erupted. Each of them would spend years behind bars. No plea deals, no escape. The judge's voice was sharp as she told them, "You used fear as your weapon, but today, justice uses you as an example." The sound of their families crying in the back row stung me for a moment. Not because I felt sorry for them, but because I thought of the ripple effect. Their actions hadn't just hurt us, they had ruined their own families too. That realization only deepened my anger. They had chosen this path. They had destroyed lives, and now their own were crumbling. After court, the community gathered outside. People hugged each other, tears of relief falling freely. Some thanked my brother, some thanked me. For the first time in years, there was no fear in their eyes. We were free. The fake HOA was gone, torn down to its rotten core. But even as the celebration began, I couldn't help but feel the weight still pressing on me. That night, sitting on my porch with my brother, I whispered, "It's over." But he shook his head slowly. "No, not yet. The law handled them, but the scars they left, those don't vanish overnight." He was right. Justice had been served, but healing was another journey entirely. The moon hung high above us, quiet and watchful, as if it too wanted to see what came next. My brother leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "You don't just survive something like this," he said softly. "You learn from it. You grow stronger. And you make sure no one else ever goes through it again." His words sank deep into me. That was the night I realized this wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about rebuilding, about finding a way to take back not just our safety, but our peace. And that journey was only beginning. The house was quiet, but my heart wasn't. It had been weeks since the sentencing. Yet I still woke up some nights with the memory of their fists pounding on my door, their voices demanding things that were never theirs to take. Healing wasn't simple. Even with justice served, the fear they planted lingered like a shadow. But every time I felt that darkness creep in, I'd look across the room and see my brother steady, calm, unshaken. That was my reminder. I wasn't alone anymore. The community had changed too. At first, people were hesitant, still wary that Something might go wrong again. But slowly, they began to step out of the fear. Families gathered on lawns again, kids laughed in the streets, and neighbors talked to each other without that haunted look in their eyes. It was as if a heavy chain had been broken. And everyone was learning how to breathe again. One Saturday afternoon, the community decided to host a block gathering. Not the fake kind the so-called HOA used to demand, but a real one. Tables lined, with food, chairs in the open air, music floating through the breeze. It wasn't fancy, but it was honest, and it was ours. For the first time, I felt like the place I lived in was truly home. My brother stood beside me, watching the families gather. Kids ran past him, laughing, and for the first time in a long while, I saw him smile, not that protective, hard smile he wore like armor, but a real one. "See that?" he said quietly, his eyes following the children. "That's why we fought. Not for revenge, but for this." But fate wasn't done testing us. A few days later, word spread that one of the fake officer's associates had shown up in town. He wasn't arrested with the others, he had slipped away before the trial. The community was afraid again, whispers of retaliation running like fire. My chest tightened with the thought of it all happening again. But my brother, he was unshaken. That night, he sat me down at the kitchen table. "Listen," he said, his voice low but firm. "Fear is what gave those men their power in the first place. If we let this rumor undo everything we've built, then they win again. We don't bow, we don't hide, we stand." His words weren't just comfort, they were a command. So when that man finally came snooping around, trying to intimidate neighbors, he found something he hadn't expected. Instead of fear, he faced resistance. People stood on their porches, refusing to back down. And when he tried to corner me, my brother was there in an instant. No threats, no fists. Just the sharp, commanding voice of a Marine. "Leave now, or you'll regret it." The man's arrogance cracked instantly. He left town that same night, humiliated, and never returned. That was the true turning point. Not the courtroom, not the sentencing, but that moment when we showed we couldn't be broken again. The community knew then that we didn't need to live in fear anymore, because we had learned how to protect ourselves and each other. Months later, as I walked through the neighborhood, I realized something. My home no longer carried the weight of those memories. The porch where I once cried in fear was now where I sat with neighbors, drinking coffee and laughing. The streets, where I once felt hunted, now echoed with kids playing until the sun dipped below the horizon. We had taken everything back, piece by piece. And it felt like breathing fresh air for the first time. But the greatest healing wasn't in the streets, it was inside me. I learned that I wasn't weak for being afraid. I was strong for surviving, for standing, for fighting back even when I was trembling. And I learned that family isn't just blood, it's the people who fight for you, who stand by you when the world tries to tear you down. One evening, as the sun painted the sky with gold and orange, I sat beside my brother on the porch. I leaned, my head against his shoulder, the quiet hum of summer crickets filling the air. "Thank you," I whispered. He didn't say anything at first. He just wrapped an arm around me and pulled me close. Then, with a soft laugh, he finally said, "You don't need to thank me. You found your own strength. I just reminded you it was there." Tears filled my eyes, but this time they weren't from fear or pain. They were from peace, real peace. The fake HOA officers had tried to steal my freedom, my safety, my life. But in the end, all they did was awaken something stronger: family, community, courage. And when they begged for mercy, it wasn't just because of what my brother had done. It was because we had shown them a truth they could never break. We don't bow to fear. We rise from it. And that was the sweetest revenge of all.